So we're going to begin tonight talking about the moral life. So the Catechism, I think we've mentioned on several occasions before, is broken up into 4 parts. And so one of the parts has to do with prayer, one of the parts has to do with the creed, one of the parts has to do with the sacraments, and then one of the parts has to do with the moral life. So this section starts somewhere. (1691) is where it starts. So we're going to use this section, like all the sections in the Catechism, right? Is again particularly rich and worth diving into. The challenge of learning about the moral life is, at least in the Catechism, is we're often going to get, if we're looking at particular things, we're going to get short answers, which are great, they're helpful, but we don't get long explanations as to why, which is not always helpful. So as we're going through all these things, tonight's really just kind of an overview to the moral life. But as we go through these, hopefully questions will arise, perhaps on difficult moral topics. And if they do, we just want to encourage people again to take advantage of putting a question in the, leave it on the table or whatnot, and we'll just kind of use that as an opportunity for us, either at the beginning of each of the next few weeks or at the end of each of the next few weeks to look at those. We want people to really have the freedom. We want to encourage people to ask. There are lots of questions that people have about living, so please ask. Let me mention 3 books, if I can, real quick, that I found personally really worth reading on the topic of the moral life and freedom and sin and whatnot. So one is, this just came out. It's an anthology of little essays written by a guy named James Schall, Schall. It's called A Line Through the Human Heart, subtitled On Sinning and Being Forgiven. James Schall is one of these, it's kind of like a Peter Kraft. You could just dip the whole book and highlight, and it's worth it. It's very rich reading, quite good. And then 2 books by a guy named Joseph Pieper, Pieper. One's called The Concept of Sin, that makes for really fun reading, especially late at night. And then another book, which this might be like one of my all-time favorite books. As you can tell, it comes in pieces. It's called The 4 Cardinal Virtues. I'm going to read a little bit of this tonight. Anybody know what the 4 cardinal virtues are? Anybody know why they're called cardinal? Because they came from St. Louis. It's unusual. No. So cardo in Latin is the word for hinge. So the idea here is, this is actually a pre-Christian concept. Cardinal virtues are those acquired, perfected habits that enable us to live this free, easy life. Like a door swings on a hinge. So when your hinge is filled with rust, or it's bent, the door doesn't swing very easily. My life often looks like a hinge that's covered in rust or bent, and it just doesn't open very well. So the cardinal virtues are these perfected habits that enable us to live a good life, and you do it easily. We'll talk about that as we go along. So this is a book I would, this is one of those books that as I read, I find I read with longing, like I hear things described. So whether it's courage or prudence or temperance or justice, those are the 4 cardinal virtues, by the way. I just kind of go, oh, I would so love to have that. So, yeah, Pieper's a masterful teacher. So as we begin doing this, here's what's in my mind as I was praying about tonight. I felt like the Lord just wanted us to reflect on. So we're going to talk about the moral life. And I was talking with somebody just the other night about their son who's kind of away from the faith not Catholic, but away from the Lord, raised in the faith, and has made a decision to just kind of push God to the side for right now. And we were talking about, why do you think that is? And she said, I think it's simply because he doesn't want to submit to any kind of authority. Which is true for most people, right? Might be true still for some of us. So as we're going through this whole rerouting process, I pray anyway that one of the things that's becoming abundantly clear is, who is this God? And the more that our image of God can become healed, the more that we can find it easier to obey him. Remember, so obey just means to hear. So obey comes from two Latin words, means to hear from. The question is, who's talking? Who's asking me to surrender? Who's asking me to do this and not to do that? And for so many of us still, our image of God is a horribly defaced and deformed image. Father Prentice is going to talk about that this weekend when he talks about the call to discipleship, which is what's going to be the theme this weekend in rerouting. And he's going to talk a little bit this weekend, and it's important, I think, tonight as we begin to talk about the moral life, to think of it this way. We need to make sure that everything we hear from God, we hear through the language of love, as opposed to through the language of lawgiver or judge or simply teacher. God gives laws, God judges, God teaches, but God is love. And so when he asks things, we need to make sure that the tone that we're hearing and that the one we see talking to us is a God who loves and who demonstrates his love by going to the cost of laying down his life for us. Does that make sense? So we're going to look tonight, just quickly, kind of an introduction to kind of the Ten Commandments and what we call the Beatitudes. But so let me just ask this question first. So I always entitle this section, when we teach it, why should we bother to be good? Just think about that for a minute. What is the reward of being good? Don't answer it, just think about it. Why should I do this? And I think it's especially problematic in the culture in which we live. It always has been, but maybe it's more magnified now simply because of the media and the accessibility we have to all sorts of people who clearly do not live a good life and who seem to be having the time of their lives. So Leo DeRocher, kind of a famous baseball manager from years past, decades past, used to say, nice guys finish last. Why would I possibly bother to be good in this culture? So one of my favorite Psalms when I'm feeling particularly prone to just kind of imitate what's going on in the world around me is Psalm 73. Flip to that real quick. So Psalm 73 begins this way: truly God is good to the upright, to those who are pure in heart. But as for me, my feet had almost stumbled, my steps had well nigh slipped, for I was envious of the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked. For they have no pangs. Their bodies are sound and sleek. They are not in trouble as other men are. They are not stricken like other men. Pride is their necklace. Violence covers them as a garment. Their eyes swell out with fatness. Their hearts overflow with follies. They scoff and speak with malice. Loftily they threaten oppression. They set their mouths against the heavens, and their tongue struts through the earth. People turn and praise them and find no fault in them, and they say, how can God know? Is there knowledge in the Most High? But these are the wicked, always at ease. They increase in riches, and all in vain have I kept my heart clean and washed my hands in innocence. For all the day I have been stricken and chastened every morning. So here's a man who's looking around the world, just like we can be tempted to look around the world and go, okay, I'm trying to live a good life, or I'm thinking about beginning to live a good life, and I'm reading the papers, or I'm logging on the internet, or I'm watching TV, and she doesn't look like she's living a good life, and she looks pretty happy. He's not living a good life. So why should I bother to do this? The answer is kind of deceptively simple. What you get out of being good is you become good. So there's a thing called the transformative power of the good, or the transformative nature of the good, which means something like this. This is the way one of the early Christians put it. He said, in regard to our moral life, the decisions that we make, we are our own parents. Meaning, I am the man I am because of the choices that I have freely made. Which is really kind of disturbing. Because some of the choices I've made are not really good choices. But blessed be God, one of the choices I can make is to repent. So we become who we are by what we choose to do. So I've got a couple of young guys I'm thinking of. They're both in their mid-40s now, and they just had a horrific childhood. Divorce multiple times, abuse, verbal, physical. Genuinely had to learn to live on the streets. And somehow they've made it. But even at this age, in a certain sense, they still kind of justify not being better than how they are because of how they grew up. And they continue to use that as an excuse. Now, that's not, don't misunderstand me, that's not to say that what they went through wasn't terrible and it doesn't have an impact. The things that I went through in my life still have an impact on me. I've got scars because of them. But at a certain point, I have to look back and go, you know what? I can't keep using that as an excuse for how I am. Like, no one has a gun to my head saying, because what happened in my life, therefore I get a free pass to just be a total jerk. And surely you understand. I mean, if you had lived my life, you'd know why I am the way I am. No. There's no excuse for me choosing to do certain things. I may have had environmental, impacts, and especially at a younger age, which are most significant. I, again, don't want to shortchange that. But at a certain point, everybody has to come to a place where they go, you know what, but I'm a man or I'm a woman, and I can make choices. And yeah, they might be really painful, difficult choices, and I might have been habituated because of the example that I saw, or because of the fact that no one ever taught me, or whatever the case might be. I might be handicapped in a certain way. And so there might be some more to overcome than somebody who didn't have some of the things that I grew up with. But still, I can be better than I am. And the only reason I'm not is because I don't want to be. Does that make sense? Okay. So, what I get out of being good is becoming good. So Pieper, here's this little section in Pieper. This is one of those passages that makes me go, oh, wow, that would be so nice to have. So he's talking in a particular way here on the virtue of temperance. So temperance is the habit of a well-ordered interior life. And so he writes this at one point. He says, in St. Thomas Aquinas' explicit opinion, the effort of self-control pertains only to the less perfect steps of the beginner, whereas real perfected virtue, by the very nature of its concept, bears the joyous, radiant seal of ease, of effortlessness. So in other words, some of us are trying to overcome maybe sinful behaviors in our life. I got a few. You might as well. And some of the things like that some people are challenged by or struggle with, they're non-issues for me. Other things, they're issues for me. The things that are not issues, there's an ease of life to that. Like, that's just not a temptation. Other things, massive temptation, still fighting something, still struggling. There's kind of like a battle for self-control. What Pieper's talking about is when temperance really becomes a virtue that we live, you just experience freedom. Right? So the more that you live a particular way, the harder it becomes to sin. I don't know about you, but that seems incredibly attractive. So someone was talking to the Archbishop one time, posing a scenario, and they were being really serious about some temptations that they and some of their friends were dealing with, and so they posed this situation, which I won't describe for you because it's irrelevant. And he heard it, and they were being really serious, and he heard it, and he went, well, that's just stupid. And they went, well, maybe it is to you, maybe that's a non-issue to you, but it's a real issue for us. He goes, it's just stupid. Why would anybody do that? And that's kind of like the baseball player who just doesn't understand how you can't hit a ball. Like, he's just that good interiorly. Like, that's just a non-issue for this guy. But for us, there's issues in our lives, right? And we all have different issues that we're struggling with. But what God wants to just put up in front of us is, I have made you to live a life of freedom, and I've put within you the capacity to do it, and I'm giving you the strength to do it. And we'll talk about some of those strengths. Now, if none of that sounds worthwhile, then you can leave. But man, it sounds worthwhile to me. So my life, oftentimes like going to the doctor. You know, you go to the doctor, he hits your knee, your foot goes flying out. And so certain things happen in our lives, and the foot goes flying out. That's a reaction. To begin to live the moral life and the life of freedom means you stop reacting and you start responding. And there's a massive difference between the two. So a stimuli comes your way, whatever it is. Maybe it's somebody yelling at you or calling you a name or being unkind or abrupt or rude, or maybe it's alcohol, maybe it's lust, maybe it's whatever. And in the past, you would have reacted. But now you're able to see it and go, that's stupid. And you're just going to walk away. So remember, God made you and me. Why? He made us to be divinized. And maybe one of the ways to think about partaking of the divine nature for us tonight is simply to say, which means that God made you to be happy. God is the happiest of all beings. No one is happier than God. God's not up there looking down from heaven going, wow, it looks like they're having a good time. I wish I could do that, but I can't. I'm God. God's just infinitely happy. And he wants you and me to be happy. We got to explain that word. We will in a second. So that's why we're here. That's why we've been created. I often think we talked a little bit last week about the wedding at Cana when we were talking about that question that Jesus asks of his mother when he addresses her as woman. So it's just worth noting, like the first miracle of Jesus is 180 gallons of wine. That's not insignificant. Like, God is a God of joy. And he made you for joy. Not for mere pleasure, for joy and for happiness. Pleasure's fleeting, and it often becomes addictive, and then it often becomes impossible to replicate. Joy is of a completely different kind. So and God has created us in such a way so that we have this drive to happiness. So even when you sin, even when I sin, what's pulling me to sin? It's a perceived happiness or a perceived good. I think I can get something out of X, whatever X is right now. And so even if it's a false understanding of a good or it's an inordinate preoccupation with a particular good, that's what's motivating me. So, you with me on this? So we're just wired this way. It's just that because of the sin of Adam and Eve and the wound that you and I have, this concupiscence that we've talked about on several occasions, this inclination to selfishness, my ability to see the true good is skewed oftentimes, and my ability to carry it out is weakened. But I'm not, even though I walk with a limp, that's how I think of concupiscence, I'm not doomed to fail. And the grace of the sacraments in a special way. Remember, when I think about sacraments give grace, what's grace? Grace is power. So God gives me supernatural strength to become a man evermore or a woman evermore conformed to the image of Jesus, which is to say to be happy. So I'm not left alone, and I think too many Christians either understand the Christian life or explain the Christian life as a matter of trying harder. And by all means, our effort is required. But if it's just up to my effort, I'm doomed. But it's not just up to my effort. It's up to my cooperation with His grace, which is being offered to me. So we talked about this a couple weeks ago when we were talking about baptism. Baptism is not this beautiful message of the all clear, the battle is over. Baptism is the announcement that you can actually win now. Now there's a chance for victory. Right? So let's flip to Matthew 5 at the Beatitudes real quick. This will be kind of a way into happiness. So the Beatitudes are oftentimes called, it's like an examination of Jesus' heart. Jesus is, all these things are a reflection of His interior life. You might hear sometimes about the gifts of the Spirit. So the Holy Spirit gives different gifts to different people for the building up of the body. So some people, speak in tongues. Some people have gifts of healing. Some people have gifts of administration or prophecy or whatnot. And He gives different gifts to different people. I used to think of the Beatitudes that way. I used to think like, oh, cool, I think that's me. I got that one. I don't have any of these other ones, but I think I'm pretty good at that one. And then I realized one day, no, I'm supposed to have all of these. And I went, oh, well, that's really kind of sobering. I was pretty excited about having almost one. So these are not like find the one that you are. These are shoot for all these, okay? So this begins what's known as the Sermon on the Mount, which is Matthew 5, 6, and 7. And it starts this way in Matthew 5, 1. Seeing the crowds, Jesus went up the mountain. And when He sat down, His disciples came to Him, and He opened His mouth and taught them, saying. So this is supposed to help us understand that Jesus is the new Moses. So Moses receives the law from God on Mount Sinai. We're going to talk about that in a moment. So Jesus is we've been talking about types, right? People, places, events, things in the Old Testament that help us better understand people, places, events, things in the New Testament. Moses is a type of Jesus. Moses receives the law. Moses is the means by which God's people are freed from slavery. Moses used to speak with God face to face, but he's just a type. The real man did all those things, but he's pointing us to Jesus. Jesus is the one who truly gives the law, and not just gives the law, but gives His Spirit, which enables us to live the law. Jesus is the one who delivers us from the ultimate slavery, which is sin and death and Satan. Jesus is the one who leads us into the true promised land, which is home, heaven. That's the importance of going up the mountain. Okay. So He opens His mouth and taught them, saying, blessed, anybody got a different translation of blessed? A different word? Some Bibles have, fortunate, happy, which is really kind of a weird translation. So blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Now listen to these with the ear of the culture in which you live. Because this is going to sound like blessed are the losers. And this is one of the passages where Friedrich Nietzsche, who's this tremendously influential thinker still for our culture, just flat out rejected Christianity. This is a faith for slaves, is what he said. It's not a faith for real men and women. Blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Who wants to be these things in the world in which you're living? Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they shall be satisfied. Blessed are the merciful, for they shall obtain mercy. Blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called sons of God. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are you when men revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely because of me. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven. For so men persecuted the prophets who were before you. The world's Beatitudes go something more like this. Blessed are those who indulge in every appetite that they have. They will be satisfied. Blessed are they who hold bitter regrets. Blessed are those who impose their will on others. They shall get what they want. That's what we live in, right? So the key word here is the word that gets translated as blessed. So the Greek word is makarioi, M-A-K-A-R-I-O-I. And it gets translated in lots of different ways. Could be blessed, could be happy. The best translation might be something like this. This is kind of a poetic translation. It's something like, on the way. On the way are the poor in spirit. On the way are those who mourn. On the way are the meek. On the way are those who hunger and thirst. On the way are the merciful. On the way are the pure in heart. On the way are the peacemakers. On the way are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake. On the way where? To conformity to God. Because that's who he is. So part of the challenge for happiness for us is we tend to think of happiness as a subjective feeling. How are you? I feel happy. I don't feel happy right now. But happiness is, while there's truth to that, I mean, there's certainly a subjective dimension of happiness. The real point of happiness is not a subjective feeling. Happiness is an objective state. So happiness comes from a Greek word which we could translate as to have a good soul. That has nothing to do with how you feel. It has to do with the objective reality of your interior life. So to be happy means to be ever more in conformity to the one who is God. And it's not what one does with the virtue that makes him happy. It's the fact that he or she is already in possession of it. Give you an example. So meek, we hear this word all the time, but it's almost never understood. So blessed are the meek, they will inherit the earth. Well, I sure as hell don't want to be meek, so I guess I'm not inheriting the earth, because my image of meek is, dormouse. And I don't want to be a dormouse. I'm not timid. I don't want to be shy. That's not me. And it's not most men that I know, and it's not a lot of women that I know either. So what do I do with that? But maybe we don't understand what meek means. Because meek's the only word that Jesus ever uses to describe his interior. He says, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden, take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek. Sometimes it gets translated as gentle. The Greek word is praus. I am meek and humble of heart. Well, Jesus is no dormouse, and he's not timid, and he's not shy. He makes a cord of whips. So meek, that word that gets translated has lots of different understandings, but one of the understandings and one of the translations of it is meek is strength under control. It's a word which was used by Greeks and Romans for breaking wild horses. So Chris comes to me and I say, hey man, check out the horse I just bought. And you look at it and you go, I think you got ripped off, Padre. And I go, why's that? He goes, it's wild. Can't do anything with it. And I look at it and I go, shoot, should have looked at that before. Okay. And I invite you back and you come back in a month and I go, check out the horse. I meeked it. Same horse, all its power, perfectly under control. That's meek. That's Jesus. He is the one through whom the universe was made. Everything he does out of love. There's no reaction like the doctor hitting your knee and your foot flying out. Jesus never reacts. He always responds. So that's what he's calling us to. So oftentimes our understanding of these just, needs some adjusting or fine-tuning. We got to always make sure when we're reading the scriptures, we're not reading them in the way that we perceive them to be. We have to understand what they're really actually saying. So that's maybe a longer introduction than we needed on our way into the Ten Commandments, because the Ten Commandments are given to us to help us to find happiness. So the Ten Commandments aren't impositions, they're not restrictions on our freedom, they're not these arbitrary set of rules that God just made up so that we wouldn't have too much fun. Because again, a lot of us have this image, these things may sound silly out loud, but a lot of us think this way inside. Our image of God is something like this. Okay, God's saying, just suck it up. Life's going to be hard for about 90 years. It's going to be miserable, but don't worry, there's a Cupid doll at the end. And to be sure, there is pain and suffering in this life. And so to believe in Jesus is not, hey, sweet, all my problems are gone. He suffered, so I don't have to. No, not true. He suffered so that my suffering would be meaningful. But the Lord's not sitting there going, okay, I just got to keep taking a couple of pounds of flesh out of you, and then when you've suffered enough, boom, okay, you can come in. Even in the midst of suffering, it's possible to find joy. So that's important as we think about the commandments. John Paul used to talk about the commandments as the 10 gifts that God gives. Gifts given to us to help us to become good. If you want to be good, if you want to be happy, live this way. If you want a miserable life, break them. There's a woman named Dr. Meg Meeker. She's on the radio sometimes with Teresa Tomeo. She's a physician up in the Traverse City area. She has a tremendous book. If you got young daughters at home, it's called Strong Fathers, Strong Daughters. It's just an extraordinary book. And in it, she says this. She was asked the question one time, what's the most rampant sexually transmitted disease amongst teenage girls? What do you think it is? It's depression. More than sadness, depression. What's it come from? It comes from not listening to the Lord. So everything, this isn't a point of finger at anybody. Everything, in fact, the American Psychological Association, I think it's the Psychological Association, did a study 15 years ago or something like that called the hypersexualization of girls. Really worth reading and very sobering. This is not sponsored by the Vatican, right? The APA is not quite in league with the Vatican. And it concludes that everything that a young girl sees from about the time she can read is geared towards trying to tell her she finds worth from being sexually attractive to a man. Everything. So, boom, she makes a decision for whatever reason, to have a sexual encounter with a 14-year-old boy. That's going to be less than fulfilling. But because of everything that she's ever read or heard or seen, because it was all geared towards this, the conclusion oftentimes is, so what was wrong with me? I must be the problem. And so what quickly happens is it just, and I see this over and over again in confession, trust me, it just spirals into more and more and more and more self-destructive behavior until, by God's grace, God can grab his daughter with his hands and say, you're not defined by your past. We can start all over again. You're cherished, precious, priceless, loved. Let's begin again. I'll make you white again. Dust you off. But if we would but listen to the Lord, we would have avoided all that. I had a young girl come see me one time. She had heard us teach about the theology of the body and kind of explain the church's teaching on sexuality and things of like what we were just talking about. She came to see me maybe when she was midway through her high school career, and she just said to me something like, I know you taught all these things to us, but I wasn't listening. And now I don't know what to do, because she had made a decision to take photographs of herself, send them to her boyfriend, and her boyfriend sent them everywhere. And she looked at me, she says, I want to kill myself. Is there hope for me? Can I come home? And the answer is, yeah, you can come home. But the sadness that was in her over having known, I heard this, but the current that's out there is so strong, combined with the current that's in here, right? Of looking for love, looking for affection. It's how we're wired. But it's so easy to get chewed up. God's in the business of restoring, repairing ruins, putting us back together. That's the great news in all this. So make sure we hear that right now for wherever it is that we might be, because the Lord wants to put us all back together. So live in a world where these things are routinely broken and you can have a miserable life. That's our world. Live in a world where we aspire to keep these. You're just going to have a more peaceful life. Though it might be hard, though it will be hard, right? Unless you live in a cave, turn off the electricity. Okay, so a key part of this, right, is freedom. And even if you turn off the electricity, you're still going to have problems. So we talked about freedom earlier on in rerouting a little bit. So freedom is one of these terribly misunderstood words. So our culture tends to think of one dimension of freedom, freedom from. So we tend to think of freedom as being free from any and all restraints, meaning I can just do whatever I want to do. That's not freedom, that's lawlessness. You can't do that driving, right? Father Mike Keating, we played him when we were talking about the introduction to the sacraments. I don't know if we played this passage or not in that talk, but he's talking about what people often call moral relativism that we live in, and this is his analogy. He says, so imagine traffic relativism. You drive on the left, you drive on the right, you drive in the middle. You go on green, you go on red, you go on yellow. You go 55, you go 95, you go 12. What do you get? You get total chaos, right? You can't live. It's just impossible. So same it is. And we see that and we go, well, that's just impossible, right? You can't do that. No one can live that way. And then we look at our moral laws and we go, ugh, shoot, that makes me uncomfortable because we're doing the same thing. You can't kill your baby, you can. All life has dignity? Not all life has dignity. That has worth, that doesn't have worth. We're living in an age like that. We have no grounding, no objective grounding in the laws that we make. So freedom isn't freedom, or it isn't only freedom from. Freedom is both freedom from, so as to be free for. That's why Mary is the perfect model of freedom. Mary is like the epitome of human freedom. So the purpose of freedom is to be able to choose to love. That's the point. No freedom, I can't love. No love, I can't be happy because I'm made for love. So the Catechism says about freedom, this is paragraph 1731, freedom is the power rooted in reason and the will to act or not to act, to do this or that, and so to perform deliberate actions on one's own responsibility. By free will, one shapes one's own life. Freedom is a force for growth and maturity in truth and goodness. It attains its perfection when it is directed toward God, who is our beatitude. The more one does what is good, the freer one becomes. The choice to disobey and to do evil is an abuse of freedom and leads to the slavery of sin. Finally, freedom makes man responsible for his acts to the extent that they are voluntary. So I tend to always think of freedom as this really remarkable burden. Like, I am who I am because of me. So freedom is a huge weight. And our choices really matter. Like, they really have consequences. They make us to be who we are. And with each choice, I'm solidifying who I am. A buddy of mine teaches at a Catholic high school, all-boys Catholic high school, and he says to all the kids freshman year, all boys set out to be men. Some of them make it. And he ain't talking about size, strength, how many letters you got in your jacket, what your GPA is. He's talking about the character inside. All boys set out to be men. All girls set out to be women. Some of them make it. And we make it to the degree that we learn to use our freedom for the purpose for which it was given to us. So Pieper, again, he puts it this way. This was another one of those kind of passages when I first came across it. He says, it's a commonplace, though nonetheless mysterious truth that man's inner order, unlike that of the crystal or the flower or the animal, is not a simply given and self-evident reality, but rather that the same forces from which human existence derives its being can upset that inner order to the point of destroying the spiritual and moral person. Most difficult to grasp is the fact that it is indeed the essential human self that is capable of throwing itself into disorder to the point of self-destruction. For man is not really a battlefield of conflicting forces and impulses which conquer one another. And if we say that the sensuality in us gets the better of our reason, this is only a vague and metaphorical manner of speaking. Rather, it is always our single self that is always chaste or unchaste, temperate or intemperate, self-preserving or self-destructive. It is always the decisive center of the whole indivisible person by which the inner order is upheld, or upset, rather. That's a really sobering passage. There's no war going on in me, there's just me. And I can either choose, and I have, to destroy myself by what I do, or to choose the good. Right? So I'm thinking of a buddy of mine who was addicted to crack. I was talking to his wife, him and his wife one time, and he had just he used to sell everything he could to get a hit. So crack is the epitome of a demonic drug, right? So crack, the first time you smoke crack, you get a high which you can never replicate. And you know this. And you're constantly trying to replicate something you can't replicate. Talk about demonic, right? I know this can't do what I want it to do, but I'm going to do it anyway. Such is the snare of the evil one, right? So this guy he sold his car once, he would sell his body. One time he had sold all the furniture in their house. And that had just happened. So his wife goes into a rage, right? So they came to see me. We're sitting there. She's just lighting into him. And as she's berating him, he turned and looked at her and says, "Do you think I like this? I hate what I do. I can't get out." That's the result of our choices. Now, praise be Jesus, grace can bust into that, take hold of us, and rescue us like that. I got a great friend who was strung out on everything short of heroin, who overnight, by getting prayed with, I mean, literally like that, threw out everything she had, smoked, popped, drank, and has never gone back to anything, and that was 40 years ago. So God can do anything, right? Nothing's impossible for God. We can change. That's the whole premise of the Christian life. Doesn't matter who we are when we go into the waters of baptism or who we are when we walk into confession for the first time. I can walk out an entirely new person with a brand new power inside me, enabling me to live the life of freedom, because that's what God made me to live. He wants me to be happy. That is why the gospel is good news. You can change. I can change. And you might be like that particular person who changed like that, who never went back to drugs. You might be the person who changes much more slowly, who goes from a place where I used to love a particular sin to the point where I'm still stuck in the particular sin, but at least I hate the sin. That's growth. Might not be the growth you or I want, but that's growth. And our consistent, persistent trying to get back up and to grow pleases the Father. That's his son or his daughter getting back up again. He loves that. Does that make sense, huh? So the power of the resurrection of Jesus, which is what's given to us in baptism, which is what's given to us in the sacrament of reconciliation, that's power right beyond anything you and I can fathom. That's a real power. It enables me to die to the stronghold of sin in my life so that I can change. Even if it just starts here, which is where it needs to start in my mind. I no longer want to do that. I'm still doing it, but I don't want to do it. And one day I will not only not want to do it, I won't do it. That's growth. And that happens by grace. Okay? Let me touch on one last thing. Now, let me take two last things. We're going to take a break. I'm going to hand it to Bob, and then we're going to come back to this next week, okay? Because this will get heavy, and it's 7:45, and this is much, okay? There's three aids to us kind of growing in the will that the Catechism talks about. So ways that I can grow in freedom. So first is just knowing what the good is. So people often think ignorance is bliss. It's not. It's just ignorance, right? God shattered mine. I'm ruining yours. So just knowing good from evil, like knowing what something is and why something is either good or evil is very helpful. So the first thing that helps me to grow in freedom is to know the good. A second thing that helps me grow in freedom is just ongoing progress in virtue. So in the same way that you go to the gym and you lift greater and greater weights each time, or you go out for a run, you run longer and longer, or it's Lent and you're able to discipline your body in whatever way. I mean, however we can grow in different things, progress in virtue helps me grow in freedom. Virtue is a perfected habit, just like sin is a habit. Sin's a habit, virtue's a habit. First thing is I got to identify, okay, I think that's wrong. So it's kind of like smoking. How do you stop smoking? You pull the cigarette out of your mouth. That's what you do. That's the step, huh? That's the progress in virtue. And then the third thing that can help us is what we would call asceticism. So just disciplining the body. This is why things like fasting are so important. If you and I can't say no to things that we can legitimately have, we'll probably never say no to things that we can't have. So it's a good thing to be able to say, that's a good thing, and I could have that, but nope, I don't need it. I'm going to pass. So whether it's fasting on a given day or a spiritual practice in Lent of, abstaining from sweets or from alcohol or TV or your Twitter account, whatever. Something that can help me just kind of grow in self-mastery. Those things, they just help me grow in freedom. And then you begin to taste it. So it's kind of like the person who's never eaten healthy their whole life. And so all they're habituated to sugar. And then they get off of it and they're going through tons of withdrawals. And then, within a period of time, as they start to eat good food, they realize, wow, I feel great. I didn't know this was possible. Like, I've never felt like this. I got energy. I don't crash in the middle of the day. I'm not reaching for a Snickers, or a quad shot or whatever. I feel good, but I didn't know you could do that. That's kind of the moral life too. Like, there's an interior freedom that's possible for us, which if you're just living in the world apart from God and his grace, you don't know it's out there. And he's sitting there going, no, there's so much more for you. There's freedom, there's joy, there's happiness. You don't need the quad shot. Okay, you can have the quad shot, but you don't need it. Yeah, I'm going to stop there because I'm going to get more lost in sin, and that's a really depressing way to end tonight, so I don't want to do that. So let's take a break. Let's have lots more food, stuff our faces with pizza, and just fill up on anything you want. And then Bob's going to talk to us a little bit about some things we need to know. And the next week, what we're going to do is get into the 10 Commandments. Here's what I would ask for next week, if you would. Just maybe throughout these days, just linger and pray with the 10 Commandments. So they're found twice. They're found in Exodus chapter 20 and in Deuteronomy 5. And I would just pray with them and ask the Lord to speak to us as we do that. And to understand that when the Lord's talking here, when he says, you shall or you shall not, the you there is not y'all. The you is Joanne. You, Joanne, shall not take the Lord's name in vain. You, Dan, shall keep holy the Sabbath. You, John, shall not commit adultery. You, Julie, shall not covet. I mean, whatever. It's your name. It's my name. This is direct address. Just like we were talking about with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, this is God inviting us into a friendship. And it requires a response from me. But it's personal friendship that's being offered me by the Lord, who is a liberator, a rescuer, a savior, a lover, who makes me to be free and you to be free. And so out of his desire for us to taste that, he says these things to us. Okay, so let's just pray with him this week and ask the Lord just to speak to us and maybe to show us those particular things where right now I'm not living in freedom. And then just ask him, Lord, give me a hunger to be free there. And then let's pray for each other that we'll experience that kind of increase in desire this week and an increase in the practice and the growth of virtue that whatever it is that we most want to have. Okay?